Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the stream, you guys. I am your host, Casty Streeter, and this is Castcast. We're going to be looking at these games. A few of them, I'm not going to say much because, to be honest, there were some games that were like, who cares? Who cares this last weekend? And also on Thursday, which, there's not going to be much to say about two teams that are obviously, rebuilding and have loads of issues. But with that being said, let me switch and we can look at ESPN. So, looking at this game, a whole lot of nothing on offense. Not even that much on defense, in my opinion. A whole lot of nothing. The leading receiver, DJ Moore, with 58 yards on 9 targets. And no passing touchdowns either in this entire game. Does that make me think that each defense is an elite level defense or that these two teams are just not that good? I think these teams are just not that good. The Panthers clearly going to have the worst record probably in the league by now. Because, it's kind of crazy for me to be saying this, but Kyler Murray comes back and, he instantly makes the Cardinals a better team when it's like, you would think that they would still want to tank, right? But they actually go out and play against a decent team and beat that team, which we'll get to, later on once we get to it. But yeah, looking at this game, good lord, is Bryce Young not doing anything? Didn't get sacked a whole lot. I mean, 3 sacks, I guess, is a few. A good amount of QB hits, pressures. Montez Sweat, obviously the Bears just signed him, a few days or not a few days before this game, but like a week or whatever, and lo and behold, 3 QB hits and a few sacks from other people. And obviously a Panthers team that gets no sacks, only 4 QB hits, and still you have, Tyson Badgett not doing very fucking below average, to be honest. Yeah, two very bad teams. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna say much about this game. There's not much to say. And then moving on, we have Colts Patriots. Another game. There is not much to say here. You've got Mac Jones. It's kind of crazy. He has such a high completion percentage. But he still had a really stupid pick. Was sacked 5 times. So good lord. Good lord, he was sacked 5 times. And then it's like the 2 picks, him and Bailey Zappi. Zappi looked like an idiot. Obviously, he kind of came in super cold turkey when they would have had a chance to win it. They bench Mac Jones. I just think it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's funny, but it's like Mac Jones had a good completion percentage. At least was passing for a high clip. And then you also have Gardner Minshew, who didn't play very well. The only TD really coming off of a play where it's like, oh yeah, the Patriots just didn't guard the edge against Jonathan Taylor. Just kind of a muffed play. The two leading wide receivers, being Pittman Jr. and Demario Douglas. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know who Demario Douglas is. He's not really the guy that you think is going to be the dude that's racking up yards on this team. With a high clip from Mac Jones. I really feel like you would either see Juju or Hunter Henry, or even Mike Gesicki, and then their second leading wide receiver being Ezekiel Elliott, who isn't known to catch it out of the backfield that much. Yeah, this a joke of a game in Germany. And it's like you look at this, it's like no sacks from New England, Only 4 QB hits. You wonder how they even got enough pressure to make, Minshew throw a pick. What a joke of a game. I did say I thought this game was going to be close in my analysis last week, but it's like this was a joke. Moving on. We've got Texans and the Bengals. I thought this would be a game, that I said that I thought that Houston could come away and win with. I did still predict the Bengals to win, but it's kind of crazy. You have CJ Stroud and Burrow duking it out for this game. Obviously, Burrow with one more pick, one more TD. CJ Stroud, one less attempt, but a little bit more yards. A very, close and methodical game. And then also Devin Singletary. Like the Cincinnati defense just looked bad in this game. I do not understand how they could be so bad. Like they're typically a very well-rounded unit, not giving up big plays and playing very well-rounded defense where it's like you don't really shine too much, but I think that this game legitimately makes CJ Stroud look like the bona fide not steal of the draft because he was, taken second, but he was the second QB taken, but obviously the clear best QB even in the last few years. Like I think that this year makes him honestly look better than Trevor Lawrence. Like he's ahead of Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence, a lot of people shit on him for, the game he played this week, but you know, pretty pretty crazy here where it's like Noah Brown, Tank Dell, you know, it's marvelous what CJ Stroud is doing. And I mean, you obviously have D'Amico Ryan, the coach, and it's fascinating to me how quickly the Texans went all in and that sort of thing. And it's like, I guess, CJ Stroud also had 2 fumbles, and he lost both of them type of thing. But then, you have Cincinnati with a fumble as well. And it's just like passing attack after passing attack. It's like, and I remember seeing when Houston, at the end of the game, they just, the end of the game, you just have, oh my goodness. But it's like you look at this freaking game and you've got, a field goal because these two teams are tied up neck and neck. And it's at Cincinnati. It's like not even a joke. And Houston, after this last week, could be a sneaky team that could possibly steal the division from Jacksonville. Jacksonville looked very rough this last weekend. Granted, they were up against a fully healthy Niners team, and the Niners clearly look like they were maybe more well rested, after their bye or something. But they clearly were like, we are out for blood this week. Where it's like, I don't think it would have mattered who played San Fran after their 3 straight losses. But yeah, this game, holy crap, was I like, geez. What a crazy game. And it's crazy too because you literally get Houston that is cold turkey in the first quarter. No points and then 10 each quarter. Which if you can do that, in my opinion, you can beat just about any team in the league. It's going to be hard for teams to outscore you with how much yardage they put up. Moving on, we have my Packers who played the Steelers. The biggest thing I'll say about this game is who knew how much an extra point could cost a team. It is absolutely insane to me that off of the second touchdown the Packers have, they ultimately have 13 points. They ultimately have 13 points type of thing where it's like then the next time they get a touchdown, they get a couple field goals, I'm sorry. Holy crap, am I, kind of bumbling around what I'm thinking. I kind of had a narrative for this game. And it's like, it's crazy to me. You have Kenny Pickett, who's going up against Ballantyne and Valentine, and Keyshawn Nixon are the cornerbacks in for the Packers. No Jair. Eric Stokes has been on IR for a little while. Rasul Douglas traded. And it's crazy to me that they weren't targeted more. There was definitely some targeting to Ballantyne primarily, but goodness, this team was almost glued to the run, which reminds me of, the Jerome Bettis days of the Steelers, where it's like they just pounded it all the time. And then they had wide receivers like Hines Ward, possession guys, which they definitely don't have really a possession guy, I feel like, on this team. But they got some Blazers and Pickens, and that Jalen Warren carving up this defense. It's like what was this? You kind of knew that they were going to be running the ball a ton. That's been their identity that they've been establishing since the beginning of the year, and it keeps getting better. And you just don't play run defense. It ultimately has been it pissed me off. It's like even last week, the Rams, who have a pretty good rushing attack, and we're running the ball quite a bit, and we're stuffing the run this week. It's like it just looked like the defense wasn't prepared, and Barry, it pisses me off. I'm one of the fans now that I am saying that I think that he either needs to become more consistent, because when he's bad, he is terrible. When he's good, the defense looks fine. And it's crazy to think that even with all of these blemishes, they still held him to, a reasonable amount of points. Like 23 points isn't anything that, like, oh yeah, a team shouldn't be able to overcome, to win games in today's NFL. But then you have, Jordan Love, who played a very solid game, I feel like. Obviously had 2 picks at the very end where it's like, oh, one is to Watson. I think it was to me, it was too much of a bullet pass, and Patrick Peterson being the scrappy veteran that he is, and also just kind of knowing the Packers, ultimately forcing a turnover. I don't think it was like a bad throw per se, but I think if you're going to bullet it like that, you've got to make it like a back shoulder or something like that, so that even if it is deflected, he's not going to be able to, deflect it inbounds to where another defender is able to get a pick. Because at that point, even if you get a field goal and the Packers hold the Pittsburgh like they did at the end of the game, and you get another field goal, you win the game. And obviously, no coach is a psychic. They're not going to know that this kind of thing is going to happen. Obviously, Love, I believe it was a third down or something like that. And it was long, but they were within striking distance or something like that, and I give Love credit. He still had poise, at the end of the game. I did feel as though it's like, if you see a team just lining up their DBs on the goal line, that is when you have to have a contingency plan to tell Love to audible to a play where you are ultimately going to try and get blockers and, have someone try to break the end zone plane and give it to him short, because that's a lot of yardage to work with. And they obviously weren't on the goal line. It was like, 20 some yards away or something like that, after they had, a very deep, opening pass down the field where it's like, oh, we get set up nicely. It couldn't be set up any nicer. And I mean, I'm not saying that LaFleur is a bad coach, but I think that you have to kind of, that's where, you need to coach a little bit better. A guy like Rodgers, might be able to make some magic and do some moves, but it seemed to me like Love was almost programmed in or locked into who he was either going to throw to. And I don't know if he's told that or not, but he threw it to he was throwing it to Watson, and it didn't seem like him and Watson were on the same page. It's been kind of shown this week that Watson has like the lowest completion percentage in the league through a minimum of 30 targets. And I do understand he missed training camp. I do understand he was injured at the beginning of the year and he hasn't been in for too many games now. But I do feel like Love is forcing it to him, and he needs to think more logically with Christian Watson in order to get this percentage up, because I don't think it's on either player. I think it's more of a chemistry thing, being on the same page like I just said, and not forcing it to him. It's just never a good thing, and defenses are gonna it's gonna make it harder on Watson the more this goes on, when it doesn't have to be. You've got guys like Wicks, Dobbs, and Jaden Reed, who are all, producing pretty well. Jaden Reed being the leading wide receiver this game. And then, I mean, even Musgrave having a pretty deep pass, and Dontavian Wicks being kind of the surprise emergence for wide receivers on the Packers, where it's like, oh, he's doing really well and he's converted on a good amount of third downs. And I mean, then Romeo Dobbs, who I believe is the leading touchdown reception leader on the Packers, this year, with his good hands, good feet, and good situational awareness. But overall, I just think that, the defense, I don't really have much to criticize about, except for the fact that they didn't really seem to get pressure on Kenny Pickett when they needed to. And, almost, early, almost a good pick by Keyshawn Nixon, but he didn't drag his feet type of thing. And, just a lot of things. And especially with a banged up secondary, I still think that they're playing pretty well. But, yeah, this team needed to get more pressure, I think, on Pickett. They definitely made him kind of run it out, a few times, but it was astounding to me how, even with the way that Pickett is, it's like they didn't really seem to do much to contain him, because he is a younger guy. He's not a runner by any means, but you still need to contain a guy like this, because I remember when he gouged for 11 and it was really bad. But overall, just kind of a disappointing loss. And it's like LaFleur said in the post game, no moral victories or anything like that. But it's like, it's, yeah, definitely no moral victories in this league. And I mean, clearly, Aaron Jones was kind of limited. He didn't do as well as I thought he would. AJ Dillon, for the first time this year, played better than Aaron Jones did. As one more effective. Obviously had a big 40-yard run as well. But I think that, AJ Dillon was very effective in the run game. But yeah, good win by Pittsburgh. They definitely forced a lot of pressure on Love and kind of limit his ability to even like scramble or run with the way that they were. But good win by them. But I honestly think the Packers just kind of beat themselves in this game, where we just, we're getting a good amount of yards passing now, but we need to be able to finish drives and with points on the board. Obviously, those 2 turnovers could have been 6 more points, and then you win the ball game. But moving on, we have Titans, Buccaneers. The Titans, Will Levis struggling a lot. A 50%, completion percentage, and Baker Mayfield finally showing up and playing, I guess. And then, not much of a run game again on this team. It's like you got, only 2 guys with, good averages, being Devin Tompkins off of 1 run, and then Baker Mayfield, where it's like he got most of his yards off of, his long 9-yard run. And, finally Mike Evans taking control of a game, but overall, I think that Tennessee, it's like they need to have a second guy besides DeAndre Hopkins, because I just don't think that DeAndre Hopkins is at the age or athleticism anymore where he can be the guy. Like, don't get me wrong, he's still a very solid wide receiver, but he's getting up there in age and obviously can't carry a team as, the one wide receiver threat. But yeah, Tennessee, I think that they are going to keep starting Will Levis. I think that they are not going to, I don't think that they are going to, bring back Tannehill, to be honest with you, because I think that Tannehill's time is done in Tennessee. I think that he's obviously older now and they know what they're going to get from him, but Will Levis, some growing pains there. But obviously not great protection either, getting sacked 4 times. Um yeah, not much to say here. I think that Tampa Bay, even though, you have Mike Evans having a really good day, it just yeah, to me it's like, you don't have a run game, you just beat a Tennessee Titan game that just wasn't on their game today. And I guess I don't know. They really showed that they still have a stout run defense because they did kind of hold Derrick Henry to obviously not that much production. But moving on, we have this crazy game: Browns Ravens. I did predict Ravens because I think that they've looked like the best team in the NFL. I still actually believe that. I think that Deshaun Watson coming back, he was able to do, what they kind of missed, obviously, with where it's like he was lethal on his legs to, some extent, able to escape, which none of their other guys can really do that. Like PJ Walker doesn't really do that. And I mean, and then obviously Jerome Ford having a very fat day exposing this Baltimore run defense, and Lamar Jackson, for whatever reason, kind of looking rough around the edges. 2 interceptions in this game, not able to have a ton of yards rushing, and neither with Gus Edwards, which I think, Cleveland realized that, oh, we're going to make you beat us in the air, because the one weakness I will say that I think the Ravens have, and it reminds me a little bit of the Eagles last year, where their passing game is good, but it's not great. Like they're not passing and airing it out every game. It comes down to Lamar Jackson, how lethal he is on the ground, as well as, Gus Edwards being the guy now, because they obviously Dobbins is out for the year. But yeah, very crazy game where it's like, maybe Cleveland gave the formula to the rest of the league. But then the other thing that I think about is that Cleveland has one of the best pass rushes in the league. Like, the only other team you can maybe argue in due time is the Niners, because now they have, Yun and Bosa reunited from their college days. But obviously, with the Browns, you got Zadarius Smith and Myles Garrett, who is having the best pass rushing stats in the league this year. He has been my bona fide best pass rusher this year, and he even said that he's like, "Oh, I'm in, the best prime of his career." Even though he's been good for so many years, he's always been elite, but this year is just kind of, the year where he's got that Aaron Donald kind of effect where it's like, oh, this dude is damn near undefendable by, linemen. But yeah, crazy game by the Browns. Obviously, they kind of, Deshaun Watson, didn't make a ton of mistakes, did have a lot of pressure on him, to be honest with you, but, you know, did really well, I think, coming back and playing a tough team like the Ravens. Moving on, we have this game, Niners, Jaguars. I just think that the Niners, were angry. They were ultimately angry about, having lost their last 3, starting off 6-0, looking like they could easily be like a one-loss team, and especially with the teams that they lost to, it's not like they were great teams, you know? It's not like they were, teams that it's like, "Oh, look at all of these guys." And Brock Purdy comes in, finally has a mistake-free game, plays very well, here, and then you have Trevor Lawrence who just looked ugh. I don't want to say anything about Trevor Lawrence, but he just got mauled in this game. He just got mauled. Where it's like 5 sacks, wasn't able to run or escape. They didn't have a run game to really speak of, to be honest with you. Christian Kirk still kind of balled out, is the only thing I can say about this team. And I do just think that I think that this, is the thing with Jacksonville is they can have these inconsistent games where they look like they were a few years ago when they first got Lawrence, and then as well as last year where it's like, oh, this team is on the cusp of being, a great team where they can win games, and there's just some games where they just suffered adversity. That's really all I have to say about it. Obviously, you look at San Fran, Kittle having a day, Ayuk having, a good day, and, Debo coming back didn't do a ton, obviously, but still had, 4 catches on 4 targets. And obviously this team is fully healthy again. Looking at the average here, who forgets about Kittle? This guy, is one of those, he's sneaky where it's like, oh yeah, he always has a good impact because of the run game and that sort of thing. But I just think that it's like, he has that mentality where it's like he could have sneaky good catches where he just gets lost in the defense. And I mean, looking at this, it's like you obviously have Hargrave still, you have Bosa, Eric Armstead, and then you throw in, Warner backing these guys up, and obviously Chase Young, getting to a late hit, but also had 2 QB hits. So already paying dividends, but it's like, goodness, it is insane how stacked the Niners are. And who knows? I mean, if trading for Young was like an act of, somewhat desperation where they're like, well, if our offense is going to be a little banged up and we're this ineffective, we've got to better our defense, and what better than to go after Chase Young and put him up beside Bosa from the college days. But yeah, it's crazy how much talent this team has. And they do have obviously somewhat of a tight window because they're going to have to re-sign some of these guys. I mean, they re-signed Bosa, but there's a good number of these guys that I just feel like they're not going to be able to keep past their current contracts. But moving on, we have Saints Vikings. I'm not going to lie, the Saints, it's really bizarre to me. I think that Derek Carr ultimately wasn't able to really do much for them, early in the game because he got hurt. And then as soon as Winston came in, even though he doesn't have the most gloriful, stat line here, they started putting up points. Because otherwise the Vikings looked like they were going to run away with this thing. Obviously 24-3 at the beginning. And then, yeah, you only score 3 points in the second half to two touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions. And it's just like, good Lord, like New Orleans to me, like how inconsistent can you be? But that's the thing with me and, my opinion on Derek Carr as well is that he is inconsistent. He might put up good yards and whatever else and have decent numbers type of thing, but there's just times when he just looks like, why can't this guy play? And, he's got a good supporting cast. Obviously, you also have Michael Thomas, who it's like had his battery and whatever else from like the Friday before. Maybe it was a distraction type thing, and it's hard to play with, that sort of thing happening. But the Vikings, it's kind of nuts to me that Joshua Dobbs looks like he can potentially be the future of the Vikings. Where it's like, oh, this guy, the team rallies behind him, and clearly he can be a difference maker, And He's got scrambling ability. He's got, a decent arm, seems to, understand the playbook pretty well, So, yeah, keep on starting this guy. Obviously, I don't know if they would be starting Hall over him after these last 2 wins when it's like, oh, it's kind of ironic because even Kirk, when they asked him opinion about whether, what he thinks about when a quarterback goes out for the season, he's like, oh, their season's ultimately over because of how important the position is. And it's very, I don't know, it's very interesting to me because even the Vikings defense is playing better. And this was a New Orleans team that the week before they finally emerged and were playing really well, which is why I thought, oh, this could be a dangerous team in November and December. But like I said, inconsistency from Derek Carr. And then it's like Jameis Winston comes in, even though he throws 2 picks, he ultimately got them back into the game. Where it's like, oh, you don't have these 2 picks. If you have a touchdown and a field goal more, which definitely seems like it would be plausible with the way that they, had 2 scores in each quarter to close out the game. But, ultimately turnovers costing them. Jameis Winston hasn't always, obviously, the 30 for 30 that one year, 30 TDs, 30 picks. But, you know, New Orleans has a good defense still, and it's like, who knows? I just don't see them benching Carr or anything like that. But it's like he keeps on getting hurt, these random injuries this year, and you wonder if at some point those injuries are going to build up and he's just not going to be able to play late year football. And obviously they've kept Jameis because he does come in and he seems like a very good backup for them, but maybe give him a shot, at starting, for some games, depending on obviously if Derek Carr can play or whatever else. But yeah, I don't know. Derek Carr just doesn't seem it to me, at this point in his career. But yeah, props to the Vikings. Honestly, they played up against a very good defense. Obviously when Dobbs came in the week prior, it was pretty insane, and it was like a miracle that they won, and how well he looked off of 2 days off of practice. But I think that Dobbs, is a fit in this system. And clearly they traded for him because they needed a quarterback, but I don't think that the Vikings even would have thought that, oh, he's going to play this well. And obviously they're doing this all without Jefferson, and he's likely to be back, in their next game, I feel like, cuz he was, I think, questionable for this game or doubtful or something like that. But yeah, props to the Vikings in this game, and that's coming from a Packers fan. Moving on, we have Falcons Cardinals. Goodness, I did not think that this game would be the way that it was. Kyler Murray coming back looking, very Kyler Murray. Scrambling, running, doing Kyler Murray things. Obviously didn't throw for a touchdown, got sacked 2 times, but also, was very elusive and running out of the pocket, picking up downs. Obviously you can kind of see here, he just being very elusive, which is what I've said as well, that I think he, is one of those kind of players that is very unorthodox, and that the longer the play goes, the more dangerous he becomes because with his height, I think that it does limit him early in the play unless he's doing like play action or something like that where he doesn't have to look over the line or try to track wide receivers beyond the line, type of thing. But hopefully this is a thing of things to come. Maybe the Cardinals aren't going to need to go and get a quarterback because, like, I mean, there's just so much controversy with them. And it's like, oh, are they going to tank? And is this the end of Kyler Murray in Arizona, or what are they going to do? It makes me wonder if how much a team would even be willing to trade for Kyler if he looks good, and their plans are to still get rid of him. I have no idea what to say. But then, yeah, looking at the Falcons, it's mind-boggling to me that Bijan obviously can have such a focal point in the game where you're running it quite a bit. And I mean, you're running it a bit with Algier too. Heineke scrambled a bit. He's kind of that, that kind of QB that he'll run if he has to. And yeah, a lot of, running, to be honest with you, from them, where it's like good running game and then abysmal passing game. Like, it is bizarre to me when you have, Bijan, Pitts, Drake London, Scott Miller, Jonu Smith, who had a big play last week, and Van Jefferson, who they traded for to at least have some veteran depth and experience, I feel like, because a lot of the guys on this team are pretty young, to be honest with you. I mean, the crazy thing about it is that I think Kyle Pitts at this point should be able to take over games with his size, speed, and stuff, but maybe they just don't have a system that is good for tight ends and receiving, because he just does not. He's not impressive, and what many consider him a bust at this point. But it's like I just don't know how they're using him, type of thing. And it's like their defense ultimately, the Cardinals, I, they looked very, I don't know, they just didn't look like themselves, and they obviously got to Kyler twice, but they weren't able to really stop the run very much. Kyler broke containment a lot. Obviously, a good number of runs here, a couple of failed ones, obviously, or a few failed ones, obviously. But then it's like James Conner had a day when I don't think that James Conner played the week before, if I remember correctly. But it's like, I don't know, Arizona, kind of crazy and kind of funny. And then if you told me that Trey McBride would have been, Kyler's target coming back, I would have been like, you're kidding, because him and Hollywood Brown are the ones that, usually they're connecting. And Hollywood Brown, I love the guy, but I feel sorry for him that he seems to be a one man show, to be honest with you. So I don't know what to think about this game, rather than Atlanta's defense looked poor, and then they were unable to pass it at all, and it's like, just I, really bizarre to me. Definitely one of these weird upsets, this week. But props to the Cardinals. Who knows what the hell their plan is? Didn't we look? We looked at this game. Did I double click this? Oh my gosh! Did I accidentally like? Okay. Moving on to Lions Chargers. This was a game that I said, oh, the Lions defense is going to get exposed. They really don't play well against good QBs. I think that the defense is very prone to just they're very prone to just like any good elite pass rusher. Clearly Herbert throwing for a ton of yards. Same with Goff, but the Chargers defense as well. This is kind of the tale of two teams, I think, at this point, that they're very, very similar. Where it's like, I don't think Goff is by any means as good as Herbert. I'm not saying that. But the way that they run their offense on the Lions, it is very easy. It's very efficient. And they just kind of nickel and dime you a lot. And then they're able to have guys that, can sometimes get deep or sometimes have big gains, type of thing. Obviously, your main bell cow receiver is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Clearly, you don't have to be a rocket scientist for that, and everyone knows. And then you have, Laporta, who's emerged on the scene, has had some big games, was leading tight ends in yards at some point this year, which is crazy for a rookie, and especially considering we've got guys like Kelsey, Kittle, um, and just some other guys in the league that and even Hawkinson, I guess, on the Vikings, but it's absolutely, crazy to me that it's like, the Detroit Lions defense just is unable to really find their groove in getting stops on defense. Which is one reason why I just think that it's like they're kind of a lock for the division, because the division's in such a rough spot. Unless the Vikings keep pulling off, being able to win without Jefferson. Jefferson comes back and they're able to keep on, you know, doing stuff with the momentum they have. But the Lions, for being a 7-2 team, they're very liable on the defensive side. And it's like that kind of ball just is hard to execute once you get into the playoffs because you may be able to get a bunch of yards. But, playoff defensive teams are just, they're just different in the sense that it's like, very opportunistic usually. The turnovers are a lot, worse. They feel a lot worse most of the time because teams just know what works and know what they can run to get yards. And Detroit just looks like they have no answer. And I mean, the other thing too is that I think that the thing that is majorly carrying this team is their O line. And I'm not saying that I think that anything's going to happen with that. I think that their O line is just very, very good, which ultimately is carrying them and makes it easier for them to do well on offense, which I think is another reason why Goff does well, is they just have such a good O line. But, the Lions winning this game by 3, it's exciting. It's fun to score a ton. But this reminds me a lot of like how my Packers were in the early 2010s when it's like, oh, they had the number one offense. The team went 15-1 when it was still a 16 game schedule, and they didn't go anywhere in the playoffs. I'm pretty sure we were like a first round exit or something like that, and it also kind of, I think that their offense is better than the Vikings was last year, but the Vikings kept on putting up insane yards. Justin Jefferson, every single year it seems like is a career year for him where he's putting up more and more yards. Obviously, this year will probably be different because he's obviously missed a good amount of time now. But they were a first round exit last year. And, I had so many, being from Minnesota, I had so many people asking, like, why wouldn't you just be a Vikings fan now? Because they're good. And it's like, I'm not a bandwagoner. I'm probably going to be a Packers fan for the rest of my life, barring that they do something like insanely dumb, where it's like, oh, yeah, they got the team, they get rid of the players that I actually hold dear, type of thing. But I just at this point, I'm a little bit more level-headed about it as well and understand that teams go into slumps. Obviously, my Packers' first slump in years, really for them the last couple of years. But yeah, the Vikings, lost in that fashion, and you have the Lions that it's like, you've got a great talent in Aiden Hutchinson, but even he, didn't really do that much this game if you're looking at his stats. 2 solo tackles, and no tackles for loss. Obviously, in a game like this, it's like they only had 1 tackle for loss the whole game from Cameron Sutton, where it's obviously a high scoring game and there's not going to be that much to go around. But I think that if you're Detroit, you really got to figure out something on defense because you do have Aiden Hutchinson is really good. Who is there? Alex Anzalone, to me, God, I actually hate whenever we play the Lions because of Anzalone. He is such a difference maker where he's just opportunistic and he's smart, but yeah, crazy high scoring game. I think that this shows the weakness for the Lions, but like, oh, you're glad to come away with a win here. And it's not even like Herbert was throwing his best balls, to be honest with you. I kind of expect more than 27 out of 40, even though that is pretty good completion wise. But, the only thing I'll say that I think the Detroit defense did pretty well was they did limit the averages of the running backs, where it's like it's hard to do that with a guy like Austin Eckler, who's a very dynamic playmaker. But, yeah, crazy close game, high scoring, not much defense. But moving on to the Giants and the Cowboys, another game where I'm just like, oh, who cares? They said this was the game of the week. Who cares? And who even cares that Dak threw for 404 yards? At this point, it is a joke to me. That he threw for so many yards, but he still threw a really stupid pick. I think I went over this. There was some other game where these guys, I think it was against the Rams when they creamed them, but Dak still threw kind of a stupid pick, and it's like, people are like, "Oh, well, who cares? It was one pick." But it's like, if bad teams that are getting absolutely mauled are able to pick you off because you're just too cocky and you still throw like a really dumb ball, then to me that's like an ego problem, and you've got to check your ego at the door in games. Being humble is kind of one of the best, I think, attributes that, a player can have, and that they're always hungry, but they don't let their ego get to them, type of thing. And it's like, Dak Prescott just doesn't have that, and he just, I, and just, I don't know, who cares? You're facing a backup guy and Tommy DeVito. How many people know him? And here's the other, I think, crazy thing about this game that, I look at is that even though obviously Dallas steamrolled the Giants, you look at the Giants and they're still able to run the ball very, very well. And it kind of proves my point about them that if they go up against a team in the postseason that has a run game, like, here's a potential matchup, the Niners and the Cowboys at some point, they're not going to be able to beat the Niners. The Niners are going to kill this team because not only do they have a ton of weapons, but they run the ball just about as good as, even God, I'm trying to think of a team that runs the ball the best in the league. But yeah, the Niners run the ball really well. It's like if you have McCaffrey, you have their O line, and Trent Williams, has been a little banged up, but there's a team that's going to beat the Cowboys. And the Cowboys aren't going to be able to protect Dak and he does have mobility, don't get me wrong, but he is not that mobile, and he's even said that he's not a you know, running quarterback or whatever, even though he does it quite a bit. But like the Giants, or I mean, the Giants have kind of proven that it's like, Saquon is obviously a good back, very explosive, strong runner, but it's like Dallas to me, even in their wins like this, where it's like, oh, you think that, ultimately they should honestly be able to win these games and limit the Giants to like 3 points. I'm sorry. But if you are killing their quarterback as much as they are, I don't care if you're letting up at the end of the game type of thing, or whatever it is. But I mean, Saquon was, running well early in the game, this game. So it's like, were they holding back then? Probably not. But they're still very susceptible against the run, and I think that's going to be their downfall this year. And yes, maybe I'm blemishing it a little bit, but like you've had games where CeeDee Lamb disappears. He obviously had a good game today. Same with Cooks. And then of course you have Gallup, who, I do really like, and I think he's a really good security blanket wide receiver, but you don't have that good of a running game, on the Cowboys. I mean, you could say this guy, Rico Dowdle, but obviously the Dallas Cowboys were running it quite a bit more than normal with how much they were pummeling the Giants. But next game up, we have Commanders and the Seahawks. Now, this game, I think, was borderline crazy because I think that Geno Smith, throwing it 47 times, I do not think is the way. And the fact that they scored 29 points, and you look at 47 pass attempts, 47 plays on 19th Kenneth Walker carries, and then Zach Charbonnet with 6. It's insane to me that you have this many plays, but you're only able to score 29. And against a Washington Commanders defense that is without Montez Sweat and without Chase Young, it is just crazy to me that you put up a good amount of yards, but it just doesn't look promising to me in the sense that, like, you're up against a team who is clearly going to rebuild their defense. Clearly. And it's like, Geno Smith only got sacked. He only got sacked once this game, but who am I to say? I'm happy that they won. I think the Seahawks do have a very intriguing team this year that I think they are kind of putting it together. I don't think the offensive scheme is, that bad, but Geno Smith just it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me, I guess, how they're able to put up such great yardage but not score too much, I guess. And then I mean, you look at obviously they're now competing again with San Fran. If San Fran keeps playing the way they are definitely the second best in this division, and obviously against some better teams, they've just not looked very good. Like Geno Smith is very limited and he gets humbled a lot by better teams. And that isn't what the Commanders are. But I will say this, good showing from Howell. Not as good of a completion percentage as I really would want, but 3 touchdowns, over 300 yards. And, Brian Robinson, and doing it without a huge day from Scary Terry. I think that is, very essential in a young QB's journey, that they kind of need to be able to prove that they don't have their security blanket in order to play well. And Sam Howell did that. And I mean, I don't know what their plan is. I don't know if, Rivera's on the hot seat or anything. I don't really think he should be, to be honest with you. I think he should be able to be given at least one more year, especially with, how well this team's played this year. And then they're continuing to play pretty well after, some significant trades. But moving on, we have Jets Raiders. I think it's absolutely crazy, I guess, that Zach Wilson threw the game away in this game or whatever else. He was obviously throwing it a ton. 39 attempts with only 23 completions. But he is going up against, the likes of Max Crosby, and he did get sacked 2 times. But it's kind of wondrous to me, I guess, how it wasn't even Crosby that was getting to him, but that he was definitely having an effect in this game. And looking at Las Vegas, it's crazy for me to say this because I thought their season was ultimately about to be over. To be honest with you, if they continue to have, and they continue to have, if they were to continue to have problems with McDaniels not getting fired, but obviously McDaniels, gets fired. They have a crazy game the week prior to this when I was like, oh, I don't think that this can happen. But the Jets, I think ultimately it's showing that their defense is still good, but their offense is going to hold them back. And obviously Brees Hall had a very hard time running it, only 28 yards off of 13 carries. And I mean, Dalvin Cook looking a little bit more alive, to be honest with you, with his 26 yards on his limited carries. But, Garrett Wilson, Tyler Conklin, Allen, and this team doesn't really have, loads of talent at wide receiver. Obviously, I think Garrett Wilson is a very spectacular player and a good wide receiver. And then Tyler Conklin's a pretty underrated, I think, tight end. But you don't really have that many other weapons on this team. Like, I don't think that they really use Allen Lazard the way that, I guess Green Bay, would have used him, where they get him open downfield and he's able to make, these big gain catches with his height, his size, and, his length. But this team just needs something a little bit more in the passing game. But that's hard to do when they do have a struggling O-line. And I think it's incredible that they only gave up 2 sacks when you're going up against a guy like Max Crosby. But yeah, the thing about the Raiders that's kind of funny is that you finally are able to, run it really well. Well, not really well, but pretty well with Josh Jacobs. We're ultimately just milking the clock, type of thing. And then you have Devontae Adams, who, 42-yard gain. They get it to him plenty. They targeted him plenty. And then the interim head coach is like, "Oh, I know who to get the ball," as a jab towards McDaniels, which I just think is hilarious. But he's definitely trying to win over the locker room. I think that he doesn't really have to do that himself, because I don't think he has to do that himself, because the locker room was sick of McDaniels. McDaniels was a joke. Just about every fan, every Raiders fan, almost everybody hated him. But, crazy Sunday night game where it's like, oh man, this just looks. And I mean, obviously, you do have Aiden O'Connell starting now for this team, and obviously he's probably going to have growing pains, but he looks kind of like a Raider, a little bit rough around the edges, but a competitor, and not afraid of, laying it out on the line, throwing it. Obviously not a great stat line. It's not like his completion percentage was too low, only one pick, one turnover. But he was also sacked 3 times against a good New York defense, is what I'll say. A New York defense, I think, is one of the top in the league that plays really well. But looking, at the Raiders, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this team can make the playoffs. Because I mean, I've seen them make the playoffs with less on very inconsistent years, and I think that this team can get better. And it's almost like when Rich Bisaccia took over for Gruden, this team kind of rallied, and they ultimately didn't hire him, but this team, has been through some dark times, minus their uniforms. And I think that, the Raiders could be kind of a sneaky team, especially when you have a guy like Crosby that is such a game wrecker, and he's in a top 5 pass rusher in the league. But moving on, we have probably the dumbest game of the week, I'm not gonna lie, that, instilled the firing, you guys, of the offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills, which I completely agree. I think the Bills have too much talent, and you have a QB that should be arguably top 5, because he has a big arm, he does, get some turnovers sometimes. But ultimately, I think that, I don't think you really would want to. I mean, even with all the turnovers that Allen has had, he wouldn't be a guy you would want to get rid of. He honestly kind of reminds me of like a modern day Brett Favre, I guess, with the turnovers that he's had, where he's obviously, he's way better at running, I guess, type of thing, because he's way bigger. And I mean, back then, I guess, the QB size wasn't really what it was today, I feel like, in a sense, where it's like you got some of these bigger, more mobile guys today, like Allen, and I mean, even Mahomes is pretty big, of a QB, to be honest, and he runs, but he, Josh Allen is like the Superman at QB, like the closest thing I can think of to like a Cam Newton when Cam, had won his MVP or whatever else. But, I don't think that Allen needs to be fixed. I think he needs a better system, because it's like him and Stephon Diggs they do some of the dumbest things. I'm not going to lie. Like some of the plays, like, sometimes, Allen is like, getting into Diggs and these weird ones where he's got like 2 guys around him, and then Diggs like fancy footwork. Like he's the only one that I would say his footwork is on level with like Davante Adams in the league. Like, he's got good speed, don't get me wrong, but he's not like Tyreek. He's got good hands. He just doesn't really have the size, but it's like his footwork. I mean, him and Davante Adams, it's like if you ever put those two on a team, there wouldn't be any reason why one of them wouldn't be open every single play, in my opinion, because it's like the footwork. Ooh, gives me shivers down my spine thinking about, Stephon Diggs. And it's like, I hated this guy when he was on Minnesota. I honestly thought he was kind of a spoiled brat, but his game has aged really well. And he's just a superb player. And to have a team like them where it's like, oh, they have James Cook, who has emerged as obviously a very lethal running back. It's almost like he stole his brother's skill from him or something. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, they've tapped into James Cook, who looks like Dalvin Cook 2.0. Not the exact same way or anything like that, but it's crazy to me that, you also have and people, I'm not trying to take anything away from the Broncos, talking so highly about the Bills, but they won kind of by a fluke. A fluke. You have 12 men on the field for the Bills. And then it's like they ultimately, and it was a 41-yarder was the initial one. So it's not like the guy was already kicking a lawn field goal. But Will Lutz, the only reason I feel like he has a job on the Broncos is because Sean Payton has somewhat of a thing for him. It's like they got rid of McMahon, who then went, who has went to the Jacksonville in his, or I mean not McMahon, McManus. Holy crap! Why did I say a retired QB's name? But it's like McManus had been on Denver his whole career, I'm pretty sure, or something, and he has a leg and wouldn't miss a 41-yarder. But it's like to give him a second chance and then to give him a 36-yarder because you lose, because you lose because you have a penalty. You have a 5-yard penalty for 12 men on the field after Josh Allen is able to get a late TD, as you guys can obviously see here. But it's like, good Lord. Good Lord, what a terrible game this was. This wasn't anything special. People that want to say that Denver is good, I'm sorry, but you guys really don't prove that much with games like this. Sure, you have Russell Wilson with a high-ass percentage, but it's like if you have 24 completed, I'm expecting more than 200 yards. And I get it, he's only 7 yards short, but it's like, what a joke to me. When they're paying you so much money, but the most you can do is kind of dump it low. And I mean, they obviously didn't have that much of a run game, but I just think that, this guy he's getting paid, so much money, but it's like, you got these guys that it's like, oh yeah, you got a couple dudes that are good, catching some, but your longest pass is 30 yards. When apparently I've heard people say that they think that Russell Wilson has a good deep ball, and I'm like, no, he doesn't. He doesn't have that good of a deep ball. And it's like, yeah, maybe your defense is playing well now, but maybe there is also something that it's to be said about that. The offensive coordinator got fired after this game. And the Bills, clearly their system is just maybe, and who knows, maybe going forward with Josh Allen, they're probably not going to change too much about, the offensive scheme because it's hard to do that, like literally a little more than halfway through the year. But maybe the scheme is what's making Allen, kind of susceptible to these interceptions. And I mean, the fumbles are another thing. The fumbles are just another thing that he's, more risky with the ball when he scrambles, which he just needs to, it's a mental thing. But interceptions are more about decisions or, but if he feels like he can try and make a play, because I mean, it's always tight coverage. Like you can't just let him not attempt to be competitive, I guess, is what I have to say about Allen. It's like, if he was really that bad and these interceptions are all his fault, there's no way he would be starting. I'm sorry, but they would have probably traded him, to be honest with you, because they could have gotten a haul for Allen years ago. They probably still could, but yeah, it's ultimately asinine to me that people think that because Denver beat Buffalo in Buffalo that they are now a good team. It's like, Buffalo shot that. They clearly are shooting themselves in the foot. And it's why I didn't even really bother to watch too much of the end, because I was like, this game is just, it's like, Buffalo's now lost 2 straight. I feel sorry for them. But, if you're trying to tell me that Denver's going to go places because they're on a 3-game win streak or whatever the heck it was, when it's like, oh, they barely beat my Packers. They barely beat my Packers, even though it's and whatever else. And then it's like they're not far removed from being handled by the Chiefs. I know that they beat the Chiefs, but the Chiefs kind of beat themselves, is how I feel in that game. And, you just kind of played teams that weren't playing at their best, to be honest with you. And I just don't really think that makes you a good team. Clearly luck can be, a fine way to win and to get wins in the regular season. But come postseason, the Broncos aren't going to do anything. I'm sorry, but I hate to sound like such a hater, but the Broncos, if they somehow make the playoffs, which they're not even a playoff team right now. They're 4-5, you guys. But I just don't see it. Because it's like, I mean, even looking at this, look at they didn't get sacks on Allen, and Russell Wilson, is getting pressured quite a bit, and he's just not the QB that he once was. And it's not like Buffalo has the best pass rush either. Like I guess Greg Rousseau is pretty good, and then you also have Von Miller, but it doesn't look like, I mean, to me, it doesn't even, Von Miller barely did anything in this game. So it's like, I don't know what to say. I think that, Denver got lucky. They got lucky. And that's all I really have to say about this game. Because they weren't running the ball well. And, their passing attack doesn't really impress me. And it's against a banged up Buffalo team who they have a plethora of injuries. They obviously have Tre'Davious White out, their best corner. And then it's like, I'm trying to think as well, who's the other guy? There's like a middle linebacker there that I think is like hurt or something. But Buffalo is banged up on the defensive side. I think if you look at their depth chart, like here, I'm just gonna look at it, really quick. Yeah, we're just gonna, we're gonna go look at the Bills really quick. It's like you have Kyle Elam injured. You have Matt Milano injured, who is arguably one of the best, a really good middle linebacker. Daquan Jones injured. So they have Tim Settle as their second DT. And then, like I said, they have Rousseau and Miller, and Rousseau's getting better. Don't get me wrong. He's still pretty young, I guess. But it's like, you have Teron Johnson, who has kind of been like, I wouldn't say involuntarily because I think he's a baller, but he's essentially become the cornerstone of this team, because obviously they don't have Tre'Davious White. Like, he's not even on here. And I'm pretty sure he's out for the year. And they traded for Rasul Douglas. They traded for Rasul Douglas because they needed help. And I mean, even Christian Benford's banged up, and it's just like, good Lord. But it's absolutely insane to me that, like, people want to think that, oh yeah, the Broncos, like they were saying on the radio station this morning, they're like, oh yeah, the Broncos are good again. And it's like, can you really say that? I would feel lucky as hell. I would be like, what? In disbelief if there were like 12 men on the field and then my Packers kick a game winner. I don't know how else you could think about it. It's insane to me. The Bills, Bills are a way better team. And it's like, we're not that many weeks removed. We're not that many weeks removed from, when the God, let me think. God, I'm trying to think of what I was gonna say, but we aren't that many weeks removed from when, like I said, the Broncos barely beat my Packers when the Packers were one of the most struggling teams or whatever else. They're still one of the most struggling teams, and they were still, and apparently they had a monster run game, but they still weren't able to put up that much, right? But we're going to move on, and we're going to move on to Thursday night. So this week on Thursday night, we have a division matchup, an AFC divisional matchup of the Bengals, who obviously they just lost against the Texans, going to play the Ravens, who also just came off a loss against the Browns. Now, I'm not going to lie, I wouldn't want to be the Bengals. I'm assuming that Higgins is probably going to play, and he needs to play. Obviously listed as questionable here, but he was a game time decision Sunday. I'm pretty sure they kind of held him out because I think that they knew that they had a chance to beat the Texans without him. Obviously, the Texans, they really kind of proved that they are a team that can play in tight games, and CJ Stroud, just continues to impress, in his rookie season. And I'll say this, potentially MVP season if they are able to have a good end of the season. But moving on, we obviously look at this. Odell Beckham Jr., who they were saying was like, oh, he finally looks like the Odell of old. He's fast again. Questionable. Marlon Humphrey, questionable. I don't think it matters too much. And then Ronnie Stanley, their star tackle, questionable. But I'm not going to lie. If I'm the Bengals and I'm looking at Lamar Jackson and I'm looking at, Gus Edwards and I'm looking at the way that Houston just made our defense look way worse than it is, I'm worried about Lamar Jackson and Gus Edwards. I don't know what to say, but Baltimore, they've only lost 3 games at this point. They are 7-3 with 7 games left. I think that they are going to mentally prepare and that they are going to play a lot better than they did on Sunday. And I'm not saying that they didn't play well, but I think that Cincinnati is way more inferior on their D-line, where it's like Lamar Jackson is probably going to be able to run a bit more. I don't think that the Bengals D-line is bad by any means, but they don't have guys like Za'Darius Smith and then, of course, Myles Garrett coming after Jackson, who's not able to escape as easily. And Cincinnati just doesn't have guys that are as, mobile on the edge as Baltimore. So I think that Lamar is going to be able to play his game. He's going to be able to run a lot. He's going to be able to pass. He's going to be able to extend plays quite a bit. Unless they really scheme to contain him, where they're like, oh, you have to throw to beat us. Which I don't think, I think that Baltimore can win that kind of game. I think that, looking at the 2 games that each of these teams played on Sunday, they were both close games that they're going to have to turn it around and play on Thursday night. So I don't really think there's that much of a disadvantage in terms of fatigue, because I think both games were obviously high scoring, type of thing. But I do also think that the Ravens, play a style of defense where it's like, how much is Cincinnati going to be able to really run against the Ravens? And looking at these teams, you obviously have Chase having a very good year. Zay Flowers, pretty recognizable and good year as a rookie, with the possibility to get 1,000 receiving yards, to be honest with you. But then you also have Gus Edwards and Lamar Jackson, putting up a lot of touchdowns, over 20 between the 2 of them. And I think that Gus Edwards he's feisty, he gets around really easily. He's got pretty good speed. The blocking for the Ravens is pretty good. They have a very good O line, in my opinion. It doesn't really. I think that it gets talked about quite a bit, but there's obviously other O lines that are talked about more. I think that with that, they play very good complementary football where it's like the defense, isn't giving up big plays, and and I'm just gonna say this. I think that this demographic is a little bit more spread out, but then again, analytics I don't think really take into effect. I think it's more of a numbers thing, but I don't really think they take into the fact that it is a division matchup. Obviously, it's prime time between two of the great QBs in the game right now, Burrow and Jackson. But I'm gonna say Ravens by 7. Well, actually, no, I'm gonna say Ravens by 6 in this game because I think it's gonna come down to the wire. But I do think that Burrow is gonna feel the pressure from. He's gonna feel the pressure from. He's gonna feel the pressure from the Ravens. I think we're gonna go look at these two depth charts real quick, and obviously looking at this, you got Higgins questionable. I think that Jamar Chase has been having a good year, but I don't think it's been like anything great, I guess. And you've got the shaky O line where it's like they got Orlando Brown to improve their O line, but he is only on one side, for Cincinnati. And like I said before, I think that Trey Hendrickson is their one guy, and he's obviously questionable, a little banged up. Is the one guy that can maybe, do a good job of keeping Lamar Jackson in, but not Sam Hubbard. Sam Hubbard, I don't really think is going to keep, Jackson contained in this game. And then you look at, the Ravens, like I said, they obviously have Ronnie Stanley, one of the best left tackles in the league, even if he is a little banged up. I think he's been a little banged up all year, to be honest, but it hasn't mattered too much. Tyler Linderbaum, a great center, and Morgan Moses, a veteran right tackle that I think is, pretty good. But, so Jackson has the benefit of having a better O line than the Bengals. And I think that is another reason why the Bengals have had, so many injuries, and Burrow, doesn't really sit comfortable in the pocket a lot, and I do think that it affects him a little bit, him being not fully confident in his O line. And it's the one weakness of the Bengals for the past few years because they lost the Super Bowl to the Rams ultimately because they couldn't protect Burrow and he was sacked a ton. And then I mean, even that postseason, it was like, oh, he gets sacked a ton. Their line is better now, but it still isn't completely fixed. Like it's hard to get that much talent for the O line as it is such a coveted thing amongst good teams in this league. But looking at the Ravens, you got Mandabik, you got Odafe, who is really good. Roquan Smith, Patrick Queen, Jadavion Clowney, who seems to be, it seems to me like he, you know, uh, keeps on journeyman, from place to place to place. But then you also look at the Ravens and you look at Kyle Hamilton, able to have a really good. He was able to have a pick six early in the game that gave them momentum, and it kind of fizzled out near the end of the game. Because the Browns were able to ultimately contain and limit the points of the Ravens late in the game for them to make a comeback, which was insane. But, this defense on very good on the Ravens. And I just think that, you know, obviously you have Cam Taylor Britt and Chidobe Awuzie on the Bengals, and I think that they're kind of shallow at DB. So I think that Flowers I think that Zay Flowers is going to be able to have a day. And I also think that this team just has good depth. I think even if Odell Beckham is on like a snap count because of his injury, I think that Mark Andrews is great. Zay Flowers, obviously Rashad Bateman, but I also think that Nelson Aguilar is a very solid like backup wide receiver that does good things. So I just think that they're pretty loaded. And clearly last week, Burrow struggled against, he struggled against the Texans who, I mean, he didn't really struggle, I guess, but he wasn't able to ultimately like win the game type of thing. And I think he's going up against a much better defense that is going to make it hard for him to do well because of, his O line. And because of that, that is the reason why I'm saying Ravens by 6. Um, I'm not gonna say much more on it. I also think that, you just have the Ravens who it's like they've gotta be fuming after their loss on Sunday, and I think with that and I think with the way the division is, they can't afford to lose this game. You can kind of say the same thing about the Bengals because I think it was that like going into Sunday, their whole division would have been in the postseason, which is just unheard of. It's an anomaly. But if you guys have any questions or anything like that, I would like for you to ask them or point anything out. But otherwise, on Saturday I'll be streaming probably at three Eastern time again or around there. Um, and that'll do it for this episode of Cast. Unless you guys have any questions, I'll give you a few moments to type them if you feel like you want to ask me anything. All right, you guys have a good rest of your day, and as always, go Pack Go.